From Florida's Space Coast, this is Your Career.
Welcome to Your Career. I'm Debbie Featherston, your host, and with me today is Dr. Tim Brock. And Tim, you are the president of the Institute for Achieving Worthy Performance. Did I get that right?
No.
Oh, no. Tell
it's
me.
the Institute for Worthy Performance is what it is, with the
that's
number
right.
4 in there.
That's right.
But
the
you were
achieving.
close.
I was close.
The important thing was you got the words worthy and performance improvement in there.
Yeah.
And that's the important thing, because that's really what I'm all about. Because when we talk about organizations, okay, we want to improve the performance not only of the organization, but also of the people.
You know, this topic of performance improvement has wide appeal to everyone. It doesn't matter if they're an employee, they're a leader, at some other capacity within the organization, right?
Yes.
Because it hits the bottom line. It always hits the bottom line, right?
That's right.
And so this becomes a win-win. Everybody gets invested in performance improvement, everybody wins.
That's exactly right.
So I'm curious, how did you really get started? Because you are known today, right? Reputation on the street is that you are known for providing thought leadership solutions to performance improvement problems.
Well, it didn't happen overnight, and it's not something I intended to get involved with. You know, I first got involved in this area of performance improvement back in 1980 when I was in the Air Force. And I was in the training area, and it was with the Titan II ICBMs, and my responsibility was, how can we ensure that our missile combat crew members, the missile launch officers, and the enlisted folks perform their duties flawlessly, because we can't have any mistakes in that area out there. And as I progressed through the ranks within the Air Force to hit field grade officers, then after I retired from the Air Force and was in corporate life, you know, in education as an executive, in engineering firms as an executive, I discovered that no matter what level in the organization you are, we all have the same issues we're looking at. We all want to do the best job we can.
Right.
But we are unable to identify what it is that is preventing us from performing our job. So we get frustrated sometimes. And I discovered that the key is to understand that we have to separate the symptoms from the root causes. But how do you do that? So over the years, I've discovered methodologies, and through my independent study and my formal education, that there are some very smart people out there who have gone before us, who've helped us solve some of these issues. And I'm able to select from this field here, this field here, this field here, to pull some things in to go, here is a systemic approach to understanding what it is that prevents us as an organization performing, because we have barriers in place that are preventing people from performing to the best of their ability.
Yeah.
So the whole idea is, how do we celebrate people? How do we optimize their performance, but we do it in a cost-effective way?
Yeah. Great question. And I know that your work has really expanded. Can you give them some examples of the work that you do?
Sure. Well, let me give you an example of the one I just came from when I was in Geneva, Switzerland, working with the United Nations.
Okay.
One of the issues that they have over there with you, and you have a lot of benefactors, nations and private benefactors, who are giving them money to go into countries out there to really help turn them around. You know, you have people out there who, you know, are living in extreme poverty, of course, and the infrastructure within the country is not such that it helps those folks. So they go in there and they want to say, okay, we're going to help, let's say, world food, you know, help them become self-sustaining with food. Well, they would go in there and they would do some things, and then the benefactors would come to them and says, well, how do we know that the results you're claiming are the results of what you're doing? So what they've done is they've adopted a new approach where the United Nations and the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund are now saying that we have to show ourselves to be accountable for the funds that have been invested with us. Now, how are we going to go about doing that? Well, what we need to do is we have to be able to answer the question, how do we know that the work that we're doing is the result, the results that we're doing is the result of the work that we're doing in the country? And the other question that has to be answered is, so what? So what, you're doing these things, what are the results? So
what impact are you having, right?
Exactly. So what the UN is doing now, what I was over there working with them on through the ROI Institute, is to show them, how can you, number one, determine alignment of all the programs and activities that you have out there so there's no waste with the program, and then how do you achieve objectives at the various levels that involve all the stakeholders that are critical for a success, to include the member nations, and then how do you evaluate it not only for the deliverables that they have, but all the way up through the impact level, three different levels of results. And that is really transforming the accountability level that the UN is having out there on a global scale of world peace and feeding the hungry and all that.
Sure.
So it's important work.
It is absolutely very important work, and this issue of accountability, we're continuing to hear more and more. That's a buzzword over the last few years that I've heard more and more when it comes to leadership. Let's make sure we're holding people accountable. So now, that's a great example, but a very complex problem. It doesn't sound simple in the least, to really get to the root of that.
Well, you think about it, the questions that you ask at each level are kind of simple, because when you're talking about, should this be something that we want to invest in? Is this something worthwhile to invest in? Then you got to ask the question is, okay, what are the indicators that the executives pay attention to out there that tells them that they have a problem worth solving? It usually revolves around quality or productivity, cost, time, those types of things. And if they have a gap between where they are and where they should be, then the question is, okay, what behaviors do people in the workplace need to do so that as a consequence of these behaviors, we're able to close those gaps? And then we take a look at, well, what do they need to know? What kind of tools and equipment do they need to have to be able to behave in that way? And then the final question that we ask is, what are the preferences that we have that is going to make them say that this is relevant to my work, that this is useful, this is helpful, and this is something that I will commit to do? And if anywhere along the way you have a breakdown, particularly at the lower levels, then it's not going to happen at the upper level. That's what we call the chain of impact.
I see.
Then simply all you do is you establish objectives at each level with the key stakeholders. How will you determine success at the end of this? And then you evaluate it. But the key thing that we're looking at here is, again, getting all the stakeholders involved, finding out who all the key players are, and then identifying how do you define success, and then we simply execute a program to achieve that and monitor it. And the cool thing about it is that no matter what size the organization, it's all about people skills. It's all about relationships and creating something whereby people will want to participate in it.
I see. And you're right, it is a very simple, straightforward process, but where you can get mired down, I think, is through really taking the time that's necessary to do the analysis.
Exactly.
And get the information.
And that's the key thing. I have a PhD, and people say I'm a doctor, but I tell them I'm not the doctor that can do you any good when you're sick. But I'm like a doctor, but I'm also like a detective. And a lot of times when people are trying to solve a problem, they come up with a solution already in mind because of what's worked in the past. It's something was called the rear view mirror effect that we have. We look into our rear view mirror of what's worked in the past before we move on forward as we go on. And what we need to be doing is be dealing with data, with evidence and facts. Something that's new is coming out that I'm involved with right now is dealing with what we call performance analytics. We've all heard about business analytics, working at what we call the high level of the things that executives pay attention to. A newer thing is what they're calling is learning analytics, where we're dealing with what people learn to do on the job through the training. And what's missing is the gap in between. What links the two is performance analytics, how people actually perform on the job. So what we're doing now is we're going into organizations and we're conducting performance analytics of how well do people perform their jobs on a day-to-day basis? What are their daily practices out there? And we're rating that on a scale, a 5-point scale of competencies to identify where are people, where should they be at these different levels, not to deal with performance management issues, but it's part of their individualized professional development program.
Right, I see that.
So the whole idea is we don't want to have what we're doing with their professional development to be a part of their performance management. Instead, what we want to do is we're investing in them, and we're going to find out what their strengths are so that we can identify hidden leaders out there in the organization and also help identify who could be a good mentor for somebody that's lacking that area. But we put an individualized professional development plan for people so that we raise everybody to the top level. And we're using this really a lot in healthcare right now. And one of the examples I like to use is, you know, if you've been in a hospital bed for a little while,
Right.
or you're next to somebody that you love next to it, and you've been there for a while, you get to know who the nurses are. Now, typically a nurse walks through the door, they respond one of two ways. Oh, great, or oh, great. Now, they're both licensed. They both have degrees. They both may have the same years of experience and the same professional, you know, courses that they've taken. But one is working at the top of her or his profession, and the other is not. So as an executive, you know, where I'm responsible for the patient's safety and outcomes, I want to know who my top performing nurses are, and then who are the nurses out there that I can invest in to bring everybody to the top of their profession out there. And that's what we're doing in healthcare right now, and it's also expanding in leadership and development areas. You know, a lot of companies invest in leadership development programs, and what happens at the end?
Right.
Where's the accountability? There's nothing.
Right.
So what we're doing is we're doing an assessment of their abilities, their competencies before, after, and then we continue to measure to ensure, okay, where are we investing in them so that we can get the results we're looking for?
Really pinpointing specific behaviors, specific skill sets, competencies.
Yeah, we're focusing on 4 competencies, right, dealing with leadership, communication, decision-making, and execution.
Okay.
And then we take a look at 51 behaviors within those to determine, okay, where they are. So it allows for the first time, this is what I really love about this, an executive can look at their entire organization to see what the competencies are of their entire organization. They've never had this ability before.
No.
One of the leading trends out there in human capital is executives says one of their top priorities out there is they don't know the strengths and vulnerabilities of their workforce. This answers that question. And they're also able to peel it down to whatever they want. We have a hospital down in Texas, and they wanted to improve the performance of their nursing corps because they wanted to improve patient outcomes. That's what they were told to do. We want to improve patient outcomes. Where do you start? How do you do that? So what they did was they did this assessment, and they assessed their nurses along these 4 competency areas, and they were able to see where the workforce was. And they did like 120 some nurses, and they were able to generate from that about 125,000 data points. From that, they got 2.3 million analytic data points, so they could really zero in and find out what are the issues out there that we need to do to focus our attention on. Okay, so that we can so that we can be wise in how we're investing our dollars and prioritize, so that we can really focus on turning things around for our patients. And the executives saw what they were looking like at all 6 hospitals. They could break it down by hospital, they could break it down by shift, they could break it down by team, all the way down to individual.
Wow.
With the focus of performance improvement.
So you've got some software program that's doing some really incredible work around performance analytics then.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because to get it that narrow and, you know, to the individual level, that's a lot of data you're sifting
through. It's an awful lot, and you have to have the analytics software to do it for you. And the thing I like about it, as soon as somebody does the assessment, as soon as they hit the send button, takes 20 minutes, boom, it's instantly in the analytics system. So executives can take a look at their dashboard and instantly have the information.
That's incredible.
It is incredible. It really is.
How are you seeing that translate into the bottom line?
Well, the bottom line, like in healthcare, you know, we're talking about the patient outcomes, but also with the Affordable Care Act, there's been a lot of more accountability in there of readmissions. So what they're doing is they're discovering they're eliminating waste, which cuts costs. They're also eliminating errors of daily practices of people out there because they didn't know how people were performing on their job day to day. So they were able to identify where they're having some challenges, opportunities for improvement in their daily practice, which means that they have better outcomes in a shorter period of time. When you're dealing with leadership development organizations out there, you know, where they're dealing with their leaders, a lot of times they spend a lot of money sending people through the programs, but what are they getting at the end of it? How are they actually improving the performance of these leaders? Well, now they have a way of determining the strengths and weaknesses of their programs, so they know we want to continue this, maybe we want to modify this. So that's going to cut costs because they're getting greater effectiveness and efficiencies out of it.
Yeah, and it's going to tell them which program, which leadership development program in this particular example is really getting us the results versus the other one not. I was just reading some studies recently, one of which that said that most of the leadership development programs are just missing the mark.
Exactly.
They're just failing, and and companies are investing billions of dollars in leadership, well, maybe not billions, but millions for sure.
Oh, it's billions.
Yeah, I thought it was.
Yeah,
but,
you were right.
you know, in leadership development. So the, you know, the greater investment, and yet they're not getting that return on their investment.
Yeah,
so
and even companies as small as 100 employees, you know, that, even though you have a small employee size, you want to know is, okay, what do I as a manager, as a leader out there, I want to invest in my employees. Where's the best way for me to go about doing that? Where should I focus my attention on? And the thing about, you know, the analytics is it uncovers a lot of mysteries that we didn't know existed in our workforce out there. So it's it's a revelation a lot of times. The data's there, we just didn't know how to get it.
Yeah, I like the fact that it's data-driven.
Yes.
Because you are taking personalities out of the issue. You're taking, you know, biases out of the equation. So you can really get to the root cause.
That's right. One of the things we're finding out there is with a lot of your newer people in the workforce, you know, we have the different generations, X, Y, Z, A, B, C. But one of the things that really attracts people to a company is how are they investing in me as an individual? And it's also a great indicator of wanting people to want to stay with the company.
Yeah, the retention piece.
And if you have an individualized professional development plan for individuals, not by, you know, we have the one-size-fits-all type of thing, everybody takes the same things, or a lot of people take the sheep dip approach if they have a problem, you know what I'm talking about, you know, one person has a problem, everybody gets it.
Right.
This one can be individualized, and the really great thing is let's say 6 months down the road you want to assess how you're doing. You can do that to see, do we need to make any adjustments as we're going along? Are we getting what we want to do? And for coaching, which is a great thing, it's happening in a lot of organizations out there, it helps the coaches to say, how are we doing as we're moving forward? Do we need to adjust things? And it also helps you to assign the right coach to the right individual based upon strengths.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah, it's very powerful.
That is that is really great because that resonates with a lot of people.
It does.
That's new learning for me. So that's exciting, Tim.
It's very exciting.
So what are some of, you may have answered this question, but let's go back just for a minute and just revisit. What are some of the common root causes that you see of performance issues? I mean, is it still really that quality? You know, what are we looking at?
Root causes can typically be boiled down into 6 categories. Now, there's different ways to look at it. I like Gilbert's model, behavior engineering model. But you know, what he looks at is when you take a look at an organization, you know, Deming said that about 85 to 95% of problems in a company are caused by the organization itself. And when you take a look at the questions you got to ask yourself is, has the company provided me with the information that I need to do my job? You know, policies, procedures, you know, all those types of things that we like to know what's expected of me.
Exactly.
The other thing is, have they given me the equipment, the tools that I need to do my job? And then finally, do they have the right incentive system in there to, you know, to reward the behavior that we want, not reward the behavior that we don't want. And then the other 3 boxes we have deal with the individual. Do I have the knowledge and skills required to perform? Do I have the capacity to perform? And am I motivated to want to perform? You know, someone said years ago, I think it was Harless, says you can basically break down the 4 questions here is, do I know what's expected of me? Okay. Will I be giving what I need to do to perform these types of things? The other thing is that how will I know I'm successful? And the last one we're dealing with here is, do I want to do it?
Right.
You know, and so if we consider those things and we take a look at performance from those variables, a lot of times we can identify what the root causes are. I don't know what's expected of me. I don't know when to start.
I don't
know
really
how
want to do
it.
this.
That's right. I don't want to do it, or I'm afraid to do it because I'm afraid I don't have the capability to do it. So, you know, organizations would be a lot easier to run if we didn't have people. But again, that's the beautiful thing about organizations because they are people. And no matter what level you are in the organization, we all have the same issues. And one of the things we're also afraid to have is to be found out that we're not as good as people think we are. So we also have to be sure that we protect the reputations of individuals out there.
Right, absolutely.
Set everybody for a win-win.
Yeah, make certain that people aren't intimidated by this, but they see it as a friend, that they see that this is a tool that's really going to help everybody grow, and you know, they probably are delivering some really outstanding results. So I want to come back to the ROI piece just a little bit more. Can you explain a little bit about the ROI methodology?
As a matter of fact, that's just one of the things I was over in Switzerland talking to them about. And the ROI methodology is simply, it adds on to the work of Kirkpatrick.
Return on investment for anybody that doesn't get that, I apologize.
Thank you very much. Return on investment. And it builds upon the work of Kirkpatrick, where he had his 4 levels of evaluation.
Sure.
And back in the early 70s, Jack Phillips was working at Martin Marietta at the time, and he went to Jim Kirkpatrick, and said to him, hey, I have this project, I have to show the return on investment for a program we have, can you help me? And Jim Kirkpatrick says, well, I'm not in the business anymore. I'm back in academia. He said, but take what I've got and use it and build upon it. So that's what Jack Phillips did. So back in the 70s, he just continued to build upon that, and he came up with a great framework in which to do it. Now, he says the ultimate level of accountability is return on investment, which is a formula. And that formula is you have your costs, and then you have your benefits, and you want to make sure that was worthwhile investment. But the ROI methodology starts off up front with the planning phase. Not only, okay, what is it that all the stakeholders have to define the success of the program, what are the needs that they have, but also what those objectives are at every level, and then the methodology at the end is the simple collecting the data that you agreed to through the evaluation phase. So a lot of times we hear people say, you know, I got an ROI of, we saved $500,000. Well, that's not an ROI. See, ROI is, like I said, it's a calculation. What they said was an impact. That was a cost-cutting thing. They saved $500,000. But what we want to do is, okay, well, what did it cost you to save that money?
Right.
So anytime you have a numerator, which is where the benefits are, you always have to have a denominator to determine, was it worth the cost of doing it? But the interesting thing is, if you come up with a negative ROI, now you have data to determine, now that we have this data, how can we turn this into a positive ROI by reducing costs even more? So it's a process improvement methodology as well.
That's really clever.
It is very clever. Jack was a very smart guy.
Saw that. You know, I'm familiar with Phillips.
Yes.
But I really didn't have that level of familiarity, obviously, to make that connection.
Yeah, and like I said, a lot of it's just common sense.
Sure. But
a lot of times we don't take the time to think it through.
Yeah.
And the whole idea is you want to identify, number one, what the key issues of the stakeholders are up front, and then identify their buy-in and what they're willing to commit to help you to collect the data that's necessary so that you can move forward, and they will continue to support you because they know they're going to get something at the end that they want.
Right.
And that's what we want to create, win-wins for everybody.
Yeah. You know, let's take this conversation a little different angle.
Okay.
There may be individuals who are listening who are really interested, have a strong interest in performance improvement, and maybe thinking about, you know, modifying their career path or stepping into this role from, you know, graduate school or wherever, right?
Right.
So what general advice might you give someone that would help them to really prepare to do well in the area of performance improvement?
Well, one thing I would recommend they do is they join the International Society for Performance Improvement. You know, that's what they're focused on. They've been on over 50 years, and they are the premier organization out there for what we're dealing with the discipline.
And give the name again.
The International Society for Performance Improvement, ISPI.com.
Yeah. .com or .org?
You know, they're .org, as a matter of fact. Thank you Thank you for correcting me on that.
ISPI.org.
.org. No wonder I can't get to their website. I go to .com all the time.
So that would be a first.
That would be a first. They also, ATD has a performance improvement element to what they do out there. So going to the Association for Talent Development could also be a good place to start. But if you do some Googling out there, do some web searches, and type in performance improvement, and start trying to read some articles. A book I would recommend is dealing with performance improvement. It's anything by Thomas Gilbert or Rumler. If anybody would be interested in getting more information about that, they can contact you, and I can get that information to them through you. But you know, you want to look at what the literature says out there, and the best place to start was with these organizations because they can get you in touch with the right people.
Definitely.
And there's also local chapters that you can get involved with as well to learn about these different things. I think another important thing that an individual could do to help them as they continue to move in this area is to keep their eyes and ears open as to what is important to the various stakeholders in their organization at different levels. One of the things I used to teach my cadets when I was, before I retired from the Air Force, officer candidates, at the ROTC program. And I used to teach my cadets is first thing you want to do is be the best at your job you can be.
You bet.
But the second thing you want to do is find out what's important to your boss, the commander there, and try to learn from her or his perspective, how can you help them solve their problem? Because when you do that, it opens up your aperture of understanding what is really going on with this organization to have an entirely different organizational perspective instead of just focusing on your niche.
Right.
And this will distinguish you among your peers out there who are very good at doing this thing, and they do the 9 to 5 type of thing, and they're out of there. You're constantly thinking about, how can I help my organization improve? How can I identify things that will help our organization move forward by helping people do their jobs better? And by doing that, it's going to give you an entirely different perspective on not only the value you can bring to your immediate boss,
Right.
but also to all the supervisors up the chain.
So in about 30 seconds or less,
Okay?
what, as an internal
Yes.
performance improvement person, what might be some challenges that a person may experience?
One of the challenges is people, I don't know why this is, but people seem to perceive people who work inside an organization with less credibility than somebody who comes in from the outside. And I never understood that because they were smart enough to get hired by you. They didn't lose any of this intellect when they came on board. So that's the number one thing. And sometimes people in an organization pigeonhole you by your position title, and sometimes people are afraid if you come in and you show them up that you're seen as competition.
Well, I'm going to have to bring you back. This is a great program, great topic, and there is so much more to talk about here. So, Tim, I really appreciate you being here, and on behalf of my guest and everyone here on this set of Your Career, thank you for watching, and remember, be career happy.
More information about this program is available online at millermediagroup.org.